Harold Jennings was not the kind of man anyone expected to change the outcome of a battle. He was 31 years old. He had soft hands from years of holding chalk. He wore his uniform the way a man wears a borrowed suit, correctly, but not naturally. Back in Wichita, Kansas, he had spent 4 years teaching high school biology to teenagers who would rather have been anywhere else. He had learned, during those 4 years, one skill above all others. How to watch something long enough until it showed you the truth about itself. The Pacific was showing him something. He just needed everyone else to stop talking long enough to see it. The island had no name worth remembering. It was a strip of coral and jungle and heat that sat in the middle of water so blue it looked painted. The Americans had been on it for 6 weeks. In 6 weeks, they had taken casualties they could not explain. 3 men from Bravo Company dead in 4 days, not at their positions, not during an assault. Between positions. Moving laterally across open ground in the way that any soldier would move, in the direction any competent officer would predict, toward the obvious next objective. 3 men. Same pattern. Same direction. Same result. Jennings had watched it happen with the part of his brain that never stopped being a biology teacher. Something was observing them. Something was reading their movement the way a predator reads the movement of prey, not reacting to where the Americans were, but predicting where they were going. He started keeping a notebook. It was a small thing, a plain composition notebook he had bought from a supply clerk. He kept it in his left breast pocket, against his chest, and he wrote in it every evening by the light of whatever was available. He recorded positions. He recorded timing. He recorded the direction of every engagement, every casualty, every lateral move that ended badly. He drew maps in the margins. He circled things. He crossed them out and circled them again. By the end of week 5, the notebook was nearly full. By the end of week 5, Jennings was certain of something that no one in command had considered. The Japanese defensive units on this island were not simply hiding. They were watching American behavior. Specifically, they were watching the position of the American command flag, that standard marker, planted with reliable consistency wherever American doctrine said to plant it, and using it to calculate the direction of the next push. They were not reading terrain. They were reading habit. American military doctrine was, in Jennings' quiet estimation, as predictable as a lesson plan. He requested a meeting with his commanding officer. Major Thomas Ilrich was not a cruel man. That is worth saying plainly, because what happens next could make him seem like one. He was an exhausted man. There is a difference, though from the inside it may not always feel like one. He had lost 8 soldiers in the past month. He was running on 4 hours of sleep and bad coffee and the specific kind of determination that looks like confidence from the outside but feels, from the inside, like a man gripping a rope above a very long drop. He listened to Jennings for approximately 4 minutes. Then he stopped listening, though he continued to appear as if he was. The command tent was crowded. Lieutenant Colonel Ferris sat to the left. The intelligence officer, a man named Beaumont, who had gone to the Naval Academy and kept a photograph of Eisenhower on his footlocker the way other men kept photographs of their wives, sat to the right with a tin cup of coffee going cold between his palms. Jennings stood at the folding table. He had his notebook. He had his maps. He had drawn the 3 flag positions in red pencil, staggered across the grid, each one deliberately wrong, each one placed not where command intended to push but where command might plausibly intend to push. 3 flags. Wrong positions. Deliberate. The idea was this: plant them before dawn. Let the Japanese forward spotters see them. Let the spotters report back. Let their commanders reposition their defensive units based on that false information. And then, watch where those units moved. Because the movement would be the answer. The movement would tell the Americans exactly where the hidden positions were. It was, Jennings explained, the same principle as disturbing a still pond and watching where the ripples went. Beaumont set down his coffee. He looked at Jennings the way a man looks at someone who has said something wrong in a way that is technically difficult to address. "Jennings," he said. "Where exactly did you go to school?" "Wichita," Jennings said. "That explains it," Beaumont said, and he was not entirely unkind when he said it. It was the tone of a man who has attended 4 years of formal military education and arrived at the conclusion that biology teachers from Kansas are not, by training, equipped to contribute to intelligence strategy. Ilrich told Jennings to return to his unit. The briefing moved on to mortar placements. Jennings did not move. He stood at the table. He turned his notebook so the map faced Ilrich directly. He said nothing else. He had already said everything. He waited. Ilrich looked at the notebook. Then he looked at Jennings. Then he looked at the notebook again in the way a man looks at something he does not want to be interested in. "Return to your unit, Sergeant," he said. Jennings picked up his notebook and returned to his unit. That evening he sat with his back against a supply crate and stared at the tree line on the eastern edge of the grid they called Sector 7. It sat still in the failing light. Patient. It had been called cold by scouts twice. Nothing in it. No movement. No sign. Jennings thought about the pond. About the ripples. He thought about a biology class he had taught in his 3rd year, a unit on camouflage and predator behavior, the way certain animals did not move to hunt but instead created conditions in which prey moved toward them. He had made his students sit for 20 minutes in complete silence, watching a terrarium, before most of them could identify the creature inside it. One girl had spotted it in 4 minutes. He had asked her how. She had said, very simply, "I didn't look for the animal. I looked for what the animal was doing to everything around it." He pulled a clean page from the back of his notebook. He drew 3 flag positions. What happened next is not, strictly speaking, in any official record. What is in the record is the result. What happened before the result belongs to the 8 hours of darkness that fell between Jennings' dismissal from the command tent and the moment Major Ilrich reached for his radio. What is known, 3 cloth supply markers, standard issue, olive-colored, were retrieved from stores. 3 soldiers from Jennings' watch rotation assisted in placing them. The placement occurred during a window of the night perimeter watch in which Jennings had carefully calculated, through arithmetic that would have been impressive from a man with formal training, that he had precisely enough unaccountable time to move and return. The flags went in the ground before dawn. Jennings returned to his rotation. He did not eat. He held a piece of hardtack from his morning ration in his right palm and turned it over slowly, the way he turned a piece of chalk when he was waiting for a student to arrive at the correct answer on their own. He did not want to rush it. He had learned, from many years of waiting for things to become clear, that the worst thing you could do was push. You watched. You waited. The system showed you its shape. By 8 in the morning, the shape had shown itself. 3 things had moved in the night. Not Americans. 3 separate Japanese defensive positions, forward units, repositioned in the hours after the flags appeared, had shifted. One into the eastern tree line of Sector 7, the section the scouts had cleared twice and called cold. One into a gully running north that had been on no one's map of concern. One onto a rooftop structure in the remains of a village half a kilometer inland, a building the Americans had assessed as unstable and unoccupied and had therefore stopped thinking about entirely. The flags had told them where to go. They had gone. And by the time Jennings had completed his morning watch and returned to camp, Major Ilrich had noticed 3 unauthorized flags planted across the forward grid and was on the radio with the volume of a man who has not slept properly in a month and has now been given a new reason to be awake. Jennings was pulled from the line before noon. He stood in front of Ilrich in the open air beside the command tent, in the full heat of the morning, without the buffer of the folding table or the presence of Beaumont or Ferris. Just the 2 of them. One of them formally furious. One of them strangely, quietly, almost irritatingly calm. Ilrich was not a shouting man. He was the kind of man who went very still and very precise when he was angry, which in some ways was worse. He asked Jennings, in a voice that was carefully level, exactly what he believed he had done. Jennings said, "I can show you, sir." Ilrich said, "I am aware you can show me. I am asking you what you believe you have done." Jennings thought about this for a moment. He had spent the night in the cold doing something that could, by a strict reading of military protocol, have ended his service entirely. He was aware of this. He had been aware of it when he picked up the cloth markers. He had been aware of it when he drove each one into the coral ground in the dark. He had decided, standing in the dark before dawn with the Pacific moving quietly behind him, that some things were true enough to be worth the cost of proving them. Sir, he said. I moved the enemy. Ilrich looked at him for a long moment. Then he held out his hand. Jennings gave him the notebook. Ilrich did not open it immediately. He stood holding it for 3-4 seconds, in a way that had nothing to do with the notebook and everything to do with a month's worth of dead soldiers and the specific weight of wondering if you missed something that was sitting right in front of you. He opened the notebook. He read standing up in the heat, without moving, for a long time. Then he called Beaumont on the radio. The reconnaissance patrol moved on Sector 7 at 2:30 in the afternoon. The scouts entered the eastern tree line expecting, at most, a 2-man spotter position. This was the standard configuration for that type of terrain. 2 men with field glasses and a radio and enough patience to stay very still for a very long time. What they found was 20 soldiers. A full defensive unit. Repositioned in the night. Dug in, properly supplied, arranged in a formation designed to repel an assault coming from the west. From the west. Because that is what the flags had told them. The flags had told them the Americans were pushing west. The unit had repositioned to meet that assault. They had moved from wherever they had been hiding, the cold tree line, the cleared gully, the occupied rooftop, and they had concentrated in the eastern sector and they had faced the wrong direction. They were waiting for an attack that was not coming. The engagement lasted less than 20 minutes. 1 American soldier was wounded, and he survived. The Japanese unit, caught repositioned and exposed and oriented entirely toward a threat that did not exist, was neutralized completely. 20 soldiers. 6 weeks of zero confirmed intelligence on their location. 3 flags. One 31-year-old biology teacher from Wichita who had asked his students to sit quietly and watch a terrarium until they could see what was hiding inside it. The after-action report described the outcome in language that was accurate in the way that all military language is accurate, which is to say, complete in its facts and entirely silent on its human content. It cited tactical initiative and field intelligence gathering. It noted the successful identification and neutralization of a concealed Japanese defensive unit of 20 personnel. It noted the single American casualty and his condition. It noted the date, the time, the grid coordinates. It did not mention the flags. It did not mention the command tent, or Beaumont's coffee, or the 4 minutes of listening followed by the cessation of listening. It did not mention the notebook or the red pencil marks or the 8 hours of darkness in which one sergeant from Kansas had moved quietly through coral and heat and done the thing he had been told not to do because he was more certain of what he had seen than he was afraid of what it would cost him. Major Ilrich signed the commendation. He did not say anything to Jennings that is recorded anywhere. Beaumont, the intelligence officer from Annapolis, requested the notebook. Jennings handed it over without argument. He walked to the supply clerk and paid 30 cents for a new composition notebook. He went back to his crate and sat down and opened it to the first page and began again from the beginning. New grid. New margins. New circles. He was watching something. He just needed to watch it long enough. Jennings was killed 11 months later on a different island. A mortar round. The position was described in the report as predictable, meaning it was the kind of target any competent gunner would calculate as a likely location, based on standard American tactical behavior. He was 32 years old. He was still carrying the composition notebook in his left breast pocket. It was his third one. The pages were dense with maps and observations and small, careful circles around things that had shown him their shape. The piece of hardtack from the morning of the flags was still in the pocket of his jacket. He had never eaten it. No one who knew him could say with certainty whether this was significant or simply the kind of small detail that attaches itself to a person and stays without meaning anything at all. His students from Wichita, the ones who had survived the war and come back to ordinary life, remembered him as a quiet teacher who could make you sit still for 20 minutes and come out the other side seeing something you had never been able to see before. They said he had a habit of holding something in his hand while he waited. A piece of chalk. A rock. Whatever was available. He held it and turned it and did not rush it. He waited for the thing to show him what it was.